might be able to hear some lovely classical music and a little bit of chit-chat in the background. It's time for a cup of tea, and I'm sitting with Matthew Willcox, who is from the Institute of Decision Making at DraftFCB, and we worked together last year very briefly in the summer. Hello, Matthew.
How do you do?
Now, you are doing a talk today. Let's pull this in to make sure that we can actually hear what we're chatting about. A lovely sort of ray of light across your face there. We're
like the Transfiguration.
So you're doing a talk today which is about irrationality and human behaviour. Can you tell us more about
Sure.
that?
I'm very fortunate to be partnering with a professor who specialises in evolutionary psychology and its potential application to marketing, called Willcox. And really sort of the talk is to sort of touch on a couple of things. One is to really pay tribute to the huge impact that behavioural economics has had and potentially has on marketing, through the understanding it gives us of how the unconscious works, and through really sort of the pillar of behavioural economics really is the sort of cognitive biases, which appear to drive irrational behaviour. But as I've been working and applying behavioural economics, there's been two questions I've had that I think, I sort of really was searching for answers for. The first is that I think sort of the field, to some extent, makes people look as if they are sort of irrational, hapless people who are not really in control of their decisions and make suboptimal decisions. And this is something that sort of comes from, kind of the field, as Amos Tversky once said, my colleagues study artificial intelligence, I choose to study natural stupidity. And I think, it's sort of, if you go through this field, you can sometimes get the impression that less than Homo sapiens or the wise man, we're more like Homer Simpson. And, so one of the things I really wanted was something to sort of help me resolve this, because I don't think it's a particularly healthy approach for marketers to sort of carry that sort of idea of the consumer into their thinking. Marketers, it's fine for behavioural economists in a lab to do that, but when we sort of are thinking about creating things for marketers, I think you need to appreciate your consumer. You need to sort of think of your consumer as yourself or smarter than yourself.
There was an Ogilvy quote, wasn't there?
There was.
If you treat your customers as if they're idiots, you'll attract idiots, kind of thing, isn't there?
Well, there's another great Ogilvy quote, as there are many, which is the consumer's not a moron, she's your wife.
Yeah.
And this is absolutely sentiment. What I'm really trying to do is say, okay, let's kind of see what is the equivalent of that in the context of behavioural economics. The second question is that, there is cognitive biases show we're very irrational in many ways, but there's like 97, or when you go on Wikipedia, there's a list of 97 cognitive biases.
Right.
And so really sort of, this is very difficult for marketers to get their heads around. They're all valid in different ways, they all affect different aspects of decision making. But what I've really been seeking is a framework to actually sort of help marketers use them, and how can you actually relate these, not use them just as sort of ways of amending your messaging at the end or your communication at the end, but how you can actually how you can bring this thinking into the strategic development of your communication and indeed brand strategy as well. And Willcox has done some really interesting work in this area, where his whole central hypothesis is that cognitive biases are not design flaws, which you may feel if you go through the behavioural economics literature, but instead they are design features. And this is a really interesting way, because they are the pillars of our success as a species. So what we're really trying to do is say, let's look at these things as success factors for humans and see how we can bring those to become success factors for brands. And Vlad's work is really to connect cognitive biases as design features that enable evolutionary goals. So that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about how you can get back to sort of how you should think about how your brand is actually sort of answering, addressing, and giving people, sort of what they need to achieve their evolutionary goals. That's the talk in a nutshell.
So when you've been working on the Institute of Decision Making for about 3 years now?
Yeah.
And where exactly in the advertising process does behavioural economics thinking fit? Some people thought that it only fitted within the planning department, but does it fit also within the creative department?
Sure.
Where does it fit in the process?
Yeah, I think sort of. You see it used. My issue is not which people are using it, but actually sort of making it less about ways to leverage people's irrationality and things like that, and more of ways to sort of be perhaps a little bit more brand strategic about things. I mean, it's very easy to say, instead of making this offer about saving $500, we'll say to people, don't lose $500. That's a classic use of loss aversion. But really kind of what I'm trying to do is to take it to a level where it becomes a bit more fundamental. It's not something that is a sprinkling, it's not sort of something, you can make this ad better by doing this, or here's something to think about, but how does it actually fit into the fundamental thinking of brand strategy?
So does it even, in many ways, belong not just in this communications veneer that is advertising, but all the way down to the product itself and how the product's positioned?
I think so, yes, absolutely. I think it can do that. And I think if you take this approach, which is understand the evolutionary goals, it's a really, really, really good way to actually kind of work out what is the space that your brand is in. What you see, and this is really interesting, and Vlad has shown this in a number of experiments, is that if you prime people to be in a state where they're seeking a certain evolutionary goal, actually some of the behavioral economic principles will change. So, for example, if you prime people to be in a state, and this is one of the things we're going to show in the presentation today, if you prime people to be in a state of self-protection, then loss aversion exceeds the 2-to-1 that Kahneman and Tversky talked about. Loss aversion is a principle where a loss has a bigger psychological impact on us than a gain has a positive impact. As Sparky Anderson, the baseball coach, said, losing hurts twice as much as winning feels good. Yeah. And but then if you prime somebody to be in a mate acquisition state, especially males, you can actually pretty much take out the effect of loss aversion. People are much less concerned about losses when they're in a mate acquisition state. So this is a really interesting thing, which is how these various evolutionary goals also affect cognitive biases.
We were talking earlier about technology, and I think you had a really interesting take on how technology is moving, where people think it's all moving towards the future, but you were kind of saying that it's moving towards the past. Could you expand on that?
Yeah. This is, I think, an interesting thought that really comes. This is the wonderful thing about my job, getting to spend time with people like evolutionary psychologists and behavioral scientists. But sort of typically, one of the things I often say to people is the industry is obsessed with what's happened in the last 6 months and what will happen in the next 6 months. Yeah. And I'm just bringing the perspective of what's been happening over the last 6 million years of hominid brain evolution, or 200,000 years of Homo sapiens being on the planet as a species. And it's really interesting when you think about what happens with technology. We tend to think it's getting more sophisticated. And in its nuts and bolts, it is getting more sophisticated. But actually, what it's doing is getting better at addressing our more primal needs. And as I said to you earlier on, you're wearing a pair of stereo headphones. What came first, stereo or mono? Mono came first, stereo came maybe 50 years later. How do we hear? We hear in stereo. And it took that time, it took the technology to catch up with how we naturally do things. Tablets are a great example. Touch is a primal thing. It is the most primal thing. It's something that is across many species. I mean, even really primitive monocell species have some form of a sense of touch. It's one of the first senses to develop. And, it is something that took us a long time to get to in terms of computers. We had keyboards and keystrokes for commands, we then had keyboards and visual interfaces, and now we have touch. But what's happened is, even though that technology has inherently gotten more complex, it is actually speaking much more to our primal selves. So I think there's a very interesting paradox here, which is as technology moves forward, it actually, in a funny sort of way, it moves backwards.
So the whole thing about touch as well, I've had issues with the whole idea of app development and the way everything's all about touch screen, and everyone's trying to do this Minority Report swishy stuff. And one of the moves that we've got is we're starting to see haptic feedback coming, which is taking that sense of touch through to, again, a more natural way of being able to feel the bump of a button, being able to feel the coarseness of a surface. And do you think because that's directing back to our more sort of primal, touchy-feely sensory self, do you think that that's something that will be more adopted because of that?
I think it is. I think my kind of view on technology is it will be successful if it goes deeper back to answering more primal things. It will not be successful because it is technologically better than the latest technology. It will be better because, as I said, it goes backwards and connects with how humans have done things for hundreds of thousands of years. You know, another great example is art. I mean, you know, if you look back, I think probably until just before the Renaissance, painting was two-dimensional. People hadn't figured out how to capture parallax and perspective and stuff like that. And that actually, you know, sort of that was something man had to learn and develop, and made something much more lifelike, much more natural, and again relate much more to how we see things. So I think your example of sort of haptic touch is similar to that. It's making it a more natural experience.
The interesting thing about your art example there as well is that it was technology that allowed that. So when you started to get camera lucida and all sorts of ways of being able to take an image almost photographically and draw it onto a canvas, then that's what allowed more exploration of realistic 3D that was never there before. So it's interesting how the technology is working along with that as well. Interesting
much
stuff.
to think about. I mean, I am at the tip of the iceberg of this stuff, as I often say. For someone, I mean, I know very little about it. How I'm learning is working with really interesting academics, and it's one of the things we've talked about this before. Is that sort of, you know, I'm amazed at how much research is interesting that can really help marketers that really gathers dust on the shelves because they don't make these connections with academics.
Well, that's wonderful. There's a call to the industry. Look more to see what we can learn from academia to apply to make our work more effective.
More human.
More human, there you go. That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Matthew.